Greetings, book lovers, enthusiasts, and all my supporters. So, last time I read the introduction to my book, Sculpting of a Psychiatrist. I hope you enjoyed my reading, and that might be the reason why you're here today listening and viewing this video. Today, the focus is on the first chapter. It is appropriately titled Beginnings, because I recount pivotal experiences from my 5 years schooling in medical school that ultimately led me toward becoming a psychiatrist. The story begins in 1973 and culminates with my graduation from medical school in 1978. I wrote 4 texts about this period, devoted to medical school training, psychology studying, psychoanalysis, and finally to the neuropsychiatry class in the 4th year of medical school. At the beginning of this period, my life took a transformative turn after attending a random lecture by a psychiatrist. This serendipitous event ignited a spark within me, setting me on a sudden orientation toward the world of psychiatry. My days were split between attending medical school classes and clinical rotations in the mornings and psychology classes at the College of Philosophy in the afternoons. It was during these psychology classes that I experienced a deep sense of belonging and connection, reaffirming that my future lay in the integration of medicine and psychology. I recognized that the ideal specialty for me was neuropsychiatry, a blend of neurology and psychiatry that was available in Yugoslavia at that time. Combining the best of both worlds, this specialty resonated with my desire to explore the relationship between the brain and behavior, paving the way for my future endeavors as a psychiatrist. Within the realm of psychology, my infatuation with psychoanalysis became my driving force. One of the texts I pen in this chapter, titled Initiation, Finding the Stone, captures the passion I developed for the psychoanalysis and how it solidified my commitment to this path. This is the reason I decided to read it to you. So now we'll start. So this text is called Initiation, Finding the Stone. In introducing this text, I return to Michelangelo's visionary art of sculpture. By way of example, I take the awakening slave. Michelangelo presented this sculpture in an unfinished form, the marble block in which the slave is stuck for eternity. I use the awakening slave sculpture as an illustration of my initiation into the psychiatric sculpture, which is still not finished and perhaps will never be. There was a need to find a good stone that was easy to carve. Was that one in Vienna? Back then, when I was young, I was very attracted to psychoanalytic theory, exactly for its magnificently shaped form. My initiation into everything psychiatric began with Sigmund Freud at the age of 16. He came into my life in a noticeable way to put the order in my mental structure shaken by the hormones of puberty. It was an opportune time to accept his teaching, even if it did not stop at the individual level. Clearly, Freud's theory extends to the sphere of family, society, and civilization from prehistory to the present time. If we focus on the individual area, as I initially did, Freud wrote about neurotic and psychotic problems as well as personality disorders, But he also explained what is known as the psychopathology of everyday life, with which I have identified a great deal. I was fascinated in many ways. I immersed myself in reading many psychoanalytic books. In addition, I have attended numerous conferences on the subject. I knew I needed an intellectual mentor, and Freud met this need that I could not satisfy in my natural surroundings. I admired him from the very first moment because of his intelligent, well formatted writing and his ability to clarify the almost inexplicable power of the unconscious in our lives. Enchanted by Freud and influenced by many other members of his circle, I fantasized about becoming a psychoanalyst. I did not care about the circular argument, the logical error committed by many of his disciples in interpreting various psychological phenomena. For me, psychoanalysis had critical importance for understanding the inner conflict that sought to be resolved within me. I found Freud's structural model of the psyche, composed of the id, ego, and superego, was the best avenue to this end. I learned the id was a source of all psychic energy, which was primarily sexual, a place where instinctive wants and needs existed. The id was governed by the principle of pleasure, with no delay, in a reflexive, self-serving way, not utilizing thinking. Its world was simple and consisted of fulfilling desires at all costs, if needed, magically, through imagination, hallucinations, or dreams. It did not matter. Everything was allowed. It was all about subjectivity to the core. On the other hand, there was the ego springing up in interaction with the outer world. It acted as a negotiator and diplomat, taking into account the limits imposed by reality. It used intellect to solve problems through reasoning, learning, synthesis and analysis, creating good relations with others, etc. The third player in this virtual space was the superego, an entity that internalized societal moral values, norms, and ideals. It was transmitted by the programming repertoire of parents in order to reach a perfect adaptation by adopting the rules of behavior without resorting to critical thinking. As one can guess from this brief presentation, these three musketeers had different tasks which often contradicted one another. Therefore, internal conflict was inevitable, first of all between id and ego, but also between superego and ego. The ego was always in the middle and needed to take into considerations the demands of the id or superego and adapt them to the present moment. It can be said that the ego was like an acrobat on a rope that was steered to maintain the balance of here and now with all its skills. This was not an easy task that required a great deal of concentration, strength, and balance. The primary weapon of the ego was the defense mechanism. I now come back to Freud to explain another concept that had an enormous impact on me. Namely, Freud picked up the Greek myth of Oedipus and included it as the main driving force behind the development of the superego, a part of the personality with the primary role of control and regulation of impulses whose uncontrolled manifestation can threaten the stability of society. The Oedipus complex refers to a group of largely unconscious ideas and feelings centered on the desire to possess the opposite sex parent and eliminate the same sex parent. It was formed during the child's psychosexual development between the ages of 3 and 5. The complex was named after the mythical Oedipus, who murdered his father and married his mother without knowing they were his parents. According to Freud, the Oedipus complex was a universal phenomenon and was responsible for unresolved grief. Resolution of the Oedipus complex was generally achieved by identifying with the same-sex parent and temporarily renouncing the opposite-sex parent. Freud pointed out that we lived under the impression of forgotten early experiences in the first 5 years of our childhood, filled with lustful passions, desperate longings, and terrifying panic directed at the people around us. In the so-called latent period between the 5th and 10 years of life, the aforementioned early drama was silenced by resorting to repression and turning to the outer world. But during puberty, under the surge of hormones, there was a return of repressed incestuous Oedipal feelings in both sexes. An important task for the healthy resolution to that mental process, which Freud called infantile neurosis, was to withdraw the libido, sexual drive energy, from the parents and transfer it to other socially acceptable individuals. The concept of the Oedipus complex helped me understand my relationship with my mother and father, especially because of the strange and easy to activate feeling of guilt, which I still occasionally have to this day. According to all this, it may be concluded that the shadows of the forgotten past fall upon the present and darken it until we decide to shine a light on it, supported by the insight that psychoanalysis gave us. Psychoanalysis plunges into the unconscious mind using the method of free associations, the analysis of dreams, noticing errors of speech and other traces that indicate the actions of the unconscious. I was pleasantly surprised by these methods, which explain easily and convincingly something that appears to be so complex. Psychoanalysis is a theory and a practice that is not limited only to psychopathology, but which has normalized the manifestation of the psychic content in each of us, so that it is clear that we are all travelers on the same ship. I like this idea because it supports the belief that we are all connected, not just biologically, but also psychologically. This understanding has influenced a more tolerant approach to oneself and others, which characterizes egalitarianism as opposed to paternalism. I finish this section with another quote from my previous book, Reflections of a Psychiatrist. Freud helped me to get to know and understand myself better, and to find a guiding post that could direct my mental energy in a certain direction. His theories and psychoanalytic method of treatment were popular in the former Yugoslavia. I became a member of the tribe with which I identified and found a common language. I acquired the knowledge that separated me from what I considered the ordinary man, and gave me the confidence, or perhaps the arrogance, in understanding everything that exists. The affiliation I refer to in the above quote occurred gradually throughout my medical and psychological studies. I found myself in a big city, which even before the Second World War had a tradition of teaching and spreading psychoanalysis, albeit only among a small group of individuals. After the war, the communist government looked with suspicion upon this method of treatment, but the already created spark was not extinguished, but ignited and multiplied. For example, the establishment of the Avila Psychiatry Department in 1952, the Medical and Pedagogical Counseling Center in 1953, and the first psychotherapy department in the Dragiša Mišović Hospital in 1956. The names of Mirko Švrakić, Vladislav Klein, Vojin Matic, and their many students were forever recorded in the annals of the development of psychoanalysis in Serbia. Later, many others joined them. When I began my studies in medicine and psychology in 1973 and 1974, respectively, psychoanalysis and psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy were widely present among the younger cadre of psychiatrists and psychologists educated abroad, especially in England and America. The main strongholds were the College of Philosophy and the Institute of Mental Health. I had the opportunity to meet and be taught by people such as Professors Boško Popović and Milan Popović, as well as many others. But the biggest impression on me was made by a man who was not a formal professor at the university, but whose books and public lectures I read and attended. His name was Vladeta Jerotić. During the 1970s and 1980s, many of his books appeared in print. I was devouring them, fascinated by his style of writing, at the same time easy to digest and complex, with a vast range of subjects to which applied psychoanalysis was linked. The cultural, religious, and social spheres about which he wrote were well beyond the realm of clinical work. Dr. Jerotić specialized in neuropsychiatry and psychotherapy in Switzerland, Germany, and France. He worked as a head of the psychotherapy department at the Dragiša Mišović Hospital in Belgrade. He was one of the translators of selected works by Sigmund Freud. He had a reputation as one of the top psychotherapists in Belgrade's professional circles. In Switzerland, Jerotić became acquainted with the work of Carl Gustav Jung, about whom he often spoke and wrote. As is well known, Jung was Freud's chosen successor. He was appointed to the position of lifetime president of the newly formed International Association of Psychoanalysts in 1909. However, they soon experienced their ideological conflict and separation, which enabled Jung to create a new school of psychoanalysis known as analytical psychology. The Freudians dismissed him and rudely belittled him, but he built and spread his theories gradually and systematically, which by far surpassed Freud's in their comprehensiveness and reach. Psychology studies and Jerotić's lectures helped me understand better the breadth and depth of Jung's teachings on archetypes, complexes, anima and animus, persona and shadow, self and ego, personal and the collective unconscious, sense of individuation, the meaning of dreams, myths and religion, neurosis and psychotherapy. A whole new world filled with universal symbols, dream analysis, spirituality, mythology, and even flying saucers opened before my eyes. Jung spent much of his life exploring such fields as quantum physics, vitalism, and Eastern and Western philosophies, including epistemology, alchemy, astrology, and sociology, as well as literature and art. The principal problem in the study of Jung's contributions was the cryptic nature of his writing and his introverted writing style, particularly characteristic of his most important works. This was why I started reading Jung's book, Man and His Symbols, aimed at a wider audience since it was easier to understand the main concepts of his theory. For a while, I was recording a series of dreams by following the instruction in this book to identify symbols and themes that blended from one dream to the next. What was also interesting is that, unlike Freud, who focused on early childhood and its influence on the rest of life, Jung devoted his mental energy to the process of individuation that characterized the second half of life. The first half of life was dominated by the ego with its power of adaptation at the service of survival in certain external circumstances. But in the second, according to Jung, the more important half of life, the major task was to find the authentic self. The words from the Gospel of Thomas fit well here to emphasize the importance of this process. If you bring out what is in you, what you bring out will save you. If you don't bring out what's inside of you, what you don't bring out will destroy you. Many of Jung's disciples consider individuation to be one of the most important ideas because it indicates the process in the service of the soul, not of parents, tribe, nation. Individuation calls each of us to stand in the presence of our own mystery and become fully responsible for who we are on this journey we call life. Successful individuation is likened to gaining permission to lead your own life. If I apply this understanding to my life, I can attest that my quest for purpose and authenticity has changed. The second half of my life consists of cultivating and broadening positive states of consciousness linked to feelings of joy, compassion, love, truth, and wisdom. Furthermore, I'm even more guided by the principle know thyself, which is built upon radically accept thyself. In my case, writing, first an autobiography, and more recently, essays in which I explore inner psychological states, interpersonal relationships, and spiritual, philosophical, and pragmatic views on the world and human nature, has led to an experience of personal expansion and transformation. This makes me feel enriched, connected, and integrated, both internally and in relation to others. So that's the end of the reading. I hope that you enjoy it. I am sending you love with cup with hearts. Until next time.